Welcome back to the Southern Citizen Podcast. I'm your host, Hope Newsom Staples. On the show, we spend time talking to those I love to call Southern citizens. To be a Southern citizen in my book, you need only meet two requirements. Number one, you have to claim the American South as your homeland. And number two, you must be 75 years or older. During each episode, we sit down with these Southern citizens and listen in as they share about their lived experience. Today's episode is going to be a little bit different, so let me explain. When I'm not behind the microphone talking to old folks for the podcast, you can find me teaching at my alma mater, Mississippi College, or as the locals call it, MC. MC is a private Christian university that serves right around 5,000 students. For the last few years, I've been an adjunct faculty member at MC in the Dyslexia Therapy Master's Program. Unbeknownst to most people, dyslexia is the most common of all learning disabilities, and a rich history and heritage exists surrounding dyslexia research and the field of dyslexia therapy. We at MC want to share this knowledge and highlight how Mississippi College is woven into this story. As always, yours truly will be facilitating the conversation. You will also hear from Kay Peterson, our fearless leader, along with commentary from our beloved academic coordinator, Shirley Tipton. If you would like to learn more about Mississippi College and the Master of Education in Dyslexia Therapy program we offer, Part 2 of this podcast will be releasing soon here on the Southern Citizen. In the meantime, please visit mc.edu to learn more about dyslexia therapy. I'm super excited about our conversation this afternoon. My name is Hope Staples, and I am an adjunct instructor here at Mississippi College, and I'm going to go around and let us all introduce ourselves.
So I'm Kay Peterson. I live in Dallas, Texas, and I'm also adjunct faculty at Mississippi College and the director of the Dyslexia Therapy graduate course.
And I'm Shirley Tipton, and I've been here forever at Mississippi College as the academic coordinator for the Dyslexia Therapy program. I was here when the program began, and I will not be here when it ends because I'm getting ready to retire and move to Florida to be near my sister.
That's wonderful, though. We're so happy for you.
Well, thank you. It's bittersweet because this program has meant so much to me over the years, and we do a wonderful thing here, and I am leaving it in very good hands.
Well, if you can't be in Clinton, I want you to be in Florida.
Thank you.
So I think we'll launch into a discussion of just the Orton-Gillingham, the history behind the methodology, and how it is still relevant for today's dyslexia therapy instructions. Okay, I'm going to kind of just let you take it from there.
So we say in our documents that we give to individuals interested in enrolling in the course or registering at Mississippi College that we are an Orton-Gillingham based course. And what that means is that it's based on the medical knowledge of Dr. Samuel T. Orton and the educational knowledge of Anna Gillingham. But it really even began before Dr. Orton and Anna Gillingham, because in 1887, a German ophthalmologist, Professor Berlin, who was a professor in Stuttgart, was actually used the term dyslexia. And then in 1895 and 1896, there were two British physicians, Dr. James Hinchelwood, who was an ophthalmologist, and W. Pringle Morgan, who was a medical physician, and they both wrote about congenital word blindness. It was interesting as I was looking through some historical books on this topic that Dr. Hinchelwood was the first physician to advocate specific instructional approach for written language disorders in children. And I had never heard that before in the training that I went through or, seminars that I've attended since then. And he advocated one-on-one teaching. He believed in what he called the alphabetic method and in a multisensory approach. So the word multisensory goes back to the 1800s. And he believed that the multisensory approach was a method of simultaneous appeal, as he said, to as many cerebral centers as possible.
I love that definition.
Isn't that a great definition? So then we go from the late 1800s to the early 1920s, and there was Dr. Samuel T. Orton was a neuropathologist, he began writing about a reading and spelling disorder that he called strephosymbolic, which to him meant twisted symbols. His research began at the University of Iowa, and then it was followed by research in New York with Anna Gillingham and Dr. Paul Dozier. And they all stressed the importance of a thorough assessment and remediation. Dr. Orton believed by the end of his career that 10 to 15% of school-aged children have such a disability that it will handicap their schoolwork. Wow. And so one of the resources that I just read last week said that we now have current research that supports this belief, 10 to 15%. And some researchers now think it could even be as much as 20%. So from 1929 to 1936, Dr. Orton served as a neuropathologist at the New York Neurological Institute. And then from 1930 to 1936, he was a professor of neurology and neuropathology at the College of Physicians and Surgeons at Columbia University. Several years ago, I had an opportunity during a professional conference and at the invitation of an instructor in New York to go to Columbia University to their archival library and look at some of the early notes that Dr. Orton and Anna Gillingham wrote. It was amazing to see all the information that they have for them. So then in 1931, Anna Gillingham, who was an educator, some think she was a psychologist, maybe what we would consider a psychometrist today, she began a 2-year internship with Dr. Orton working on language disabilities at the Neurological Institute of New York. She had been a teacher for a long time, and she had been concerned about students that she was working with. She knew they were very bright, but they were not learning to read at the rate that she felt they should have. And once she began working with Dr. Orton and began hearing about his methods and his techniques on this thing called simultaneous multisensory instruction, then she took his thoughts and merged them with her academic information to put together a curriculum. And so she was very thankful that she found the answer to the questions that she had from her 2-year internship with Dr. Orton. So from 32 to 36, Dr. Orton began a language research project at the New York Neurological Institute. And there he developed diagnostic and treatment procedures for reading, spelling, handwriting, comprehension, speech development for certain language disorders. I thought this next comment was very interesting. They said that Dr. Orton always spoke of the strengths and not only the weaknesses of our students. Mm-hmm. And I think that's so important for us to remember. Mm-hmm. So after Anna Gillingham finished her internship with Dr. Orton, she began working with Bessie Stillman. They had been colleagues for a long time, and they organized Dr. Orton's principles into a remedial program for students who struggle with reading, spelling, and writing. And in their teaching manuals, we would call them a teacher's guide today, but they called them teaching manuals. And in those manuals, Anna and Bessie provide instruction for auditory, visual, and kinesthetic association of the letter introductions through the technique of what they called a linkage and through what they called the VAK learning triangle.
Sounds very familiar, doesn't it?
Rings a bell.
Yes.
So the child was engaged in seeing, hearing, and tracing the letter as they introduced every new letter.
Can I ask a question about
Sure.
those manuals? Mm-hmm. Was it structured kind of like our situation learning, where it was lessons that were laid out?
If you were to put our Foundations for Literacy next to one of their 4 manuals, they're organized in the same way. They're topical rather than lesson planning.
Okay.
So they learned how to lesson plan in the training part, but there was a chapter on reading, a chapter on spelling, a chapter on handwriting. In fact, one of the books that I looked at last week had a picture that Dr. Orton had drawn several years ago about how important it was for the cursive handwriting for the paper to be parallel to the writing arm. So if they were left-handed, it needed to be parallel to their left hand. If they were right-handed, it needed to be. So all the way back then, he knew that handwriting paper needed to be parallel to the student's writing arm so that left-handed children didn't develop a hook when they were writing.
And you have some of those manuals?
I have all of them except the 1936 that people have very generously found different places in brought to me.
So do you think our foundations textbook, probably the writers of that would have referenced those manuals?
Well, it would have
in
been
some-
Sally Childs and Alec Cox would have written the first name for it was Structures of Literacy,
Mhm.
and then it was Foundations for
Mhm.
Literacy.
But the manuals more than likely influenced.
Oh, absolutely,
Our-
because there are some pages that are very
Mhm.
closely associated. The books are the same size. So the first book was the 1936. I don't know what color that was. I have the 1946. It was gray, and then there was a green book and a red book. I think the 1936 was what they called Old Brown, and I don't have a copy of it. But if you put them side by side with our Foundations of Literacy,
Mhm.
they're exactly the same size, and they follow kind of in the same order. So then Anna Gillingham's next and Bessie Stillman's next adventure was to travel to Hawaii for 2 years in 1935. And they spent those 2 years training Beth Slingerland, who was the author of the Slingerland Method, which is still very much being taught all over, not just our country, but one of our colleagues goes to Dubai every summer, Nancy Cushion White, to teach the Slingerland Method. So
Oh.
it's very, very much still in place.
And I think I have a friend that went to a Slingerland school in Memphis.
Mm-hmm. It's
Okay.
very similar.
Yeah. I wish somebody would send me to Hawaii for
I
2
know.
years.
To train somebody. So in the 1946 manual, there is almost an identical description of our 8-step linkage and the VAK triangle. And then in 1938, both Anna Gillingham and Bessie Stillman returned to New York, and that's where they continued working, training teachers, continuing to establish their program, and managing the distribution of their materials.
I love this timeline because I feel like so many people I encounter on a daily basis that have questions about dyslexia and dyslexia therapy, they perceive this as something that has only existed in the last couple decades and that we just don't know much about it. And then when you're able to share with them the historical perspective and how much research we have and how much research has gone back to prove some of these theories that these important folks had in this field, it's really kind of astounding for people to hear that. So I think it's important to lay that foundation.
Well, I've often wondered how, especially Dr. Orton, how he would feel if he could see the research that the Shawitzes have done and the National Institute of Child Health and Human Development research sites, the research that they've done that proves so many of his theories.
Mm-hmm. He was really ahead of his time.
Very much ahead of his time.
But it's also kind of sad that it has taken as long as it has to have this filter down to the children and adults with dyslexia that need therapy. But it's built on solid foundation, and yet it's not known about that much.
That's right.
Well, and most states now have some kind of dyslexia law. They're all different in varying degrees, but most states have something. But even in those states, for example, I live in Texas, and we've had a dyslexia law since 1985. We still have public school districts who deny that they have anyone with dyslexia, and so they certainly don't need anybody trained in a comprehensive way to teach those children how to read, write, and spell.
That's right.
You know, I've been thinking about a lot to do with this lately, and one reason I think people take that opinion is that it all feels very conceptual and not real until you sit either across from or beside a child who you know is intelligent and they can't sound out a word with more than 3 sounds. And you know that they have the ability, but there's a discrepancy. And so I think some of it is just folks just have never had to interact with a person and see that struggle. Does that make sense? Just with the students that I've worked with recently, that's kind of what I've been thinking about, is that it doesn't, we might know that it's true, but it's not really real to us until you're sitting there working with that individual and you see the struggle and how difficult it is for them.
And it doesn't affect just that child or that young adult. It affects the whole family and everyone that interacts with them. And oftentimes, it's been interesting to see how many individuals have come to Mississippi College, and after about the 3rd day of our course said, this is what I struggled with my whole life, and I didn't know why. Or in Dallas, I was training a class. We had a young man in the class, and he was working with a young man who was dyslexic. And about the second or third week of them working together, the student young man said, do you mean to tell me that if I learn these letters and I learn the sounds that these letters make, I can learn to read? And the teacher said yes. And he said, I can hardly wait to tell my mom that it wasn't her fault because she dropped me.
Oh, my.
I mean, yeah. So, like, it's more than just the individual. It's, and people try to place blame, you know, and figure out what they might have done wrong, you know, and why their child can't do something. But historically, that kind of gets us where we need to be, right? To transition to, do we want to talk about now how Mississippi College became what it is?
So what I'd like to start out by saying is that it is a ministry from our Heavenly Father that He made possible, because I have had many colleagues that tried to get just 1 3-hour course on a campus and could not get through all the departments and all the bureaucracy of a department. And I also want to say that it's because of work that was done long before I got here in 2003 for the first meeting and starting the class in 2004. So the Masons in Mississippi had been working for a long time, specifically Mr. J.W. Fagan and Mr. Howard Kears, had been working with Dr. Waits, who was the medical director at Scottish Rite Hospital for many years in Dallas.
Who's from my hometown.
He's from Laurel and played football at Ole Miss. And so Dr. Waits helped with the legislative process in Mississippi. He also, in his department at the hospital, they had a community outreach department that there were several staff members that would come to Mississippi with Dr. Waits to do different workshops and seminars and things for teachers. And Dr. Waits held the first kind of public conference for individuals that wanted to know more about dyslexia. So they'd been coming for several years for that. And then I'm not sure who invited whom, but somehow Dr. Waits and his team of ladies held a conference here on the Mississippi College campus. And Martha Sibley, who was one of the ladies in his community outreach department, because at the hospital, after alphabetic phonics was written in the 60s, then Dr. Waits realized that there were too many schools, and it was written for public schools in Texas. They only support public schools in Texas at that time. He realized that there were not enough therapists to provide therapy for as many children. So they developed a videotaped presentation of what we teach face-to-face to students. And so they would come to Mississippi and do what they call facilitator training, which is a 3-day training for paraprofessionals to go into a classroom and use the cassette tapes at that time with this information on it.
Oh, it was like audio?
It was audio. Well, it was audio and visual.
Okay.
It was like a VCR tape.
Oh,
Yes,
okay.
thank you.
Okay, VHS.
I used the wrong thing. Yeah,
That's okay.
VHS tape. Had to go back a little further. So at one of these sessions here on the campus at Mississippi College that Martha was, where she was the presenter that day.
About what year do you think we're in right now?
I think we're in the late 90s.
Okay.
I think is where I have asked the hospital what year Dr. Waits retired so I could kind of figure out where we were. We're either in the late 90s or like 2000, 2001.
As the young folks like to say, the late 1900s.
Yeah, the late 1900s. We were in the late 1900s.
What do you think motivated Dr. Waits to want to help Mississippi? Do you think it was because that's where he was from?
He was very pro-Mississippi, very much. And he had taken quite a few neurology courses in the course of his medical degree, and he just got really interested in this field and was very, very much wanting to bring it all to Mississippi. So here was Martha on the Mississippi College campus, and she had 120 teachers that attended this session. And she said after the session, I think she said about 30
Okay.
came up to her and told her that they wanted to learn how to do what Miss Biddle was doing on the tapes. So she and Mr. Fagan and Mr. Kears evidently made an appointment for some of the administration here at Mississippi College, and that's kind of what got the ball rolling. In the meantime, Dr. Margaret Carmine, who was a professor here in the School of Education at Mississippi College, had gone to Dallas and talked with them about this alphabetic phonics curriculum that they had developed. And she went to Columbia University in New York and was trained by Judith Bursch. And then when she came back, then that's when she got interested in, she was a really great support of this beginning here on campus.
And it also helped that Mr. Fagan was on the Board of Trustees for Mississippi College, so that was really the hook.
And Martha Sibley was a graduate of Mississippi
Correct.
College.
So a lot of
groundwork was laid long before.
Now, did you attend this initial conference that you were talking about?
Mm-mm.
Okay. Were you here at that time, Shirley?
No, I was not.
Not
Okay.
yet.
Not yet.
Okay.
I'm a-coming.
You haven't made it into
No.
the timeline yet.
So we have to thank Dr. Waits and Martha Sibley and Dr. Carmine and Mr. Fagan and Mr. Kears for all kind of planting the seeds. And then kind of in the meantime, the first Mississippi Department of Education dyslexia coordinator was hired, and a new Mississippi Dyslexia Handbook was written, kind of based on what we have in Texas, I think, at the time. So then here was this first conference that was co-sponsored by the Masons and supported by Dr. Waits, Dr. Venetia Jackson, who's been here before to speak at our conferences. Gladys Kolonoskophy at the time was the director of the dyslexia department. Elizabeth Cantrell was in the community outreach, and then Martha Sibley, who was in community outreach, and they all had a part in setting the stage for what was to come at Mississippi
that was all
College.
at the Texas Scottish Rite Hospital program.
Right.
Okay.
That was all of them.
Okay. But they came to the conference? Is that what you
They
were?
were they did.
Okay, they presented. Where do you think on campus that was held?
Probably in Swore Auditorium.
And that we think is probably the 1990s, we said.
Late
So-
1990s.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah.
Then Mr. Fagan, who was a Sovereign Grand Inspector General for the Masons, who was a Mississippi College trustee, initiated discussions with the administration at MC about creating a course. And so I think that happened maybe in August of 2003. And then, meanwhile, back in Dallas, Barbara Fox and I were instructors for several training centers in Dallas. And at one of them, we had begun inviting Martha Sibley to come and as a guest instructor and give a lecture on IDEA and 504, the two federal laws that govern dyslexia. IDEA being an eligibility law and 504 being a protection law. And after one of those sessions, she had called and asked me told me about the discussions at Mississippi College and would I be willing to travel to Mississippi. And I said, sure, thinking, nothing, knowing what was happening with my other colleagues, thinking nothing would ever
Had you
come.
heard of all of this that was happening? Okay.
Had no knowledge.
Did you know about Mississippi College?
Yes, I knew about it because some of my friends at church had come to Mississippi College, so I knew about Mississippi College. So the next time she came to one of our sessions to present this lecture on IDEA and 504, after the session, let me back up. So when she first talked to me about it, I told her, that I of course I would consider it and think about it, but we would need 2 instructors. And so she asked me who I would want to go with me, and I told her Barbara Fox because we had been teaching together for a long time. So the next time she came to one of our classes, then she asked Barbara and I together if we would consider this adventure, and we told her that we would. And so in February, I think it was February, Shirley, of 2004, Barbara and I came to Clinton, Mississippi, and we met with Dr. Locke, who was the dean of the School of Education, Dr. Howard, who was the
Vice President
of Academic Affairs, thank you, and the president.
Leroy's.
of the college
Okay.
at the time.
Were you here at this point, Shirley?
She had just been hired.
I was hired October. This was my retirement job from the state. And I thought, this will be wonderful. I'll be 2 miles from home, and I can be a secretary. I've been one before, and this will be a wonderful retirement job. So easy, so wonderful. And then it all hit the fan. No, it's been wonderful, but
Right.
it was totally unexpected. And I truly believe, as Kay said, this is a ministry, and God had put me here for such a time as this.
I was just telling my mom today your plans for retirement, and she said, "Well, how long has Shirley been at MC?" And I said, "Well, I think
20
right at
years.
20 years."
20
And
years and 3 months, but who's counting?
well, and I told her, I said, I want to say she came here just she wanted to just have a little retirement job and be a secretary. And my mom said, "Well, she got a lot more than she bargained for."
And it's been a blessing.
Well, and I tell people the same thing when they say, "How in the world did you get to Mississippi College?" And I say, it was a gift from my Heavenly Father. It wasn't anything I've ever asked for, thought about, but it truly is a ministry. It's as much a ministry for us
It is.
as it is for those that we are trying to minister to.
That's right.
Do you know why Miss Sibley, not
Mrs.
Sibley,
Martha Sibley.
maybe what motivated her to approach you for this?
Well, we had known one another. We weren't close friends, but we had known one another from a professional organization that we belonged to. And she was the president of that organization, and then she asked me to be the next president of the organization. So we had worked together professionally. And I had been to some of the sessions that she presented at in other places, and I knew that she understood IDEA and 504. And I wanted our teachers in training to hear it from someone who, she had been a classroom teacher, she worked at the hospital, and I just felt like she would be a good one for them to hear all that information from. So other than that, I don't know why.
Maybe it was Providence, right? Like you
Maybe.
said.
Absolutely.
Maybe. It is very unlikely that any of our other colleagues have had the opportunity to talk with university administration like we did on that day.
And
So-
were they all receptive to what was happening?
Yes, so Barbara and I were sitting here side by side. Dr. Locke was sitting where you are. And so when he asked us, what we need to do for this degree, which was more than a 3-hour course, so from the very beginning, we wanted it to be appropriate for accreditation from the accrediting body that we were associated with. So we told him we needed 200 classroom hours, we needed 820 supervised teaching hours, 10 observations, all the requirements. And he sat across the table from us, and in a few minutes he had it all planned out.
Wow.
He had done similar things in his role with psychology. So he had set programs up before, but this was new for him as well. He knew as little about dyslexia as I did, but he was willing to learn.
From the very beginning, Barbara and I both wanted it to be eligible for accreditation, because
Right.
that's just another stamp of approval for the public, because individuals come and review everything that you're doing to confirm that what you say is there is really there. And the fact that she and I had both trained for other courses in other places, it wasn't something brand new for us. And I had been working with an instructor in Kansas, and she very graciously, she and I talked and developed a contractual situation for me to use the curriculum that she and I had worked on together in Kansas, because we had just taught from the curriculum of whoever was the director in the other location before. We hadn't actually written all of our own curriculum. So there were a lot of things in place.
Yeah.
So that's February 2004, right? So about March, I think, is when Dr. Locke called and said, "We have the Master of Education degree approved. Can you begin this summer?"
So February, then March, and then start.
July. Cohort 1.
And at that point, he came to me and said, I know you came to be my secretary. I think he called it an administrative assistant, but it's a secretary job. And he said, but we're going to have a new program, and I would like for you to set it up and get it running. And I went, said, don't worry about it. It'll be fine. There won't ever be more than 2 cohorts running at one time. And now there are 6 in 3 different locations. So it has grown and grown and grown.
Mm-hmm. That's amazing, though.
It is.
So in May, we had our first orientation, and Dr. Waits came and was the guest speaker, and Martha Sibley came and was a guest speaker. And then we began in July. And Dr. Jeff Black, so by this time, Dr. Waits had retired from the hospital, and Dr. Jeff Black had come to be the medical director. In that first summer, he came to Clinton and was the guest speaker on the neurology of the brain for cohort 1.
So that initial cohort, there was not a lot of time to recruit.
We immediately got 13 students from all over the state, not just in this surrounding
And
area.
Alabama.
Yeah,
So there were
in
13.
Alabama. That's right. There were 13 to start. We had one person for personal reasons that had to stop at that point, but she came back and finished the program. So it was 13 and then it was 12. And everything was done with paper records, pencil and paper records, and had to set up all of the financial things that we needed to do. Even the registration was done on paper forms. So it was like the dark ages compared to now.
Yeah, and even in 2004, as far as social media and the internet, like
It's none of that.
how were folks finding out about it in such a brief time?
Word of mouth and people that really truly bought into it and wanted to learn. And a lot of it was because people had seen the tapes from Texas Scottish Rite, and they had always wanted to understand
Right.
how to teach a child. And I tell you, we've got teachers that have struggled for years and years and years, knowing that they wanted to help these children, but not knowing how. And we provided the information that they need to be able to do that. And traditionally now, the best way we recruit people is word of mouth. They see what other people are doing, and they want to do it too.
And they see the success of the children.
Exactly.
So Terry Broom was in cohort 1, and she has just recently retired from being an adjunct faculty at the Blue Mountain location.
We love you, Terry.
We do love you, Terry. And Mary Lou Johnson was in cohort 2, and she is at the Blue Mountain location. So then we had our first official Mississippi College Dyslexia Conference in 2008. And Karen Averett, who is the lead author for the Take Flight curriculum at Scottish Rite Hospital, came as a guest speaker. Jan Hankins spoke. Then in 2011, the Blue Mountain location was set up. So
And
Shirley, remind us how that got started.
Okay, that was done as a part of a congressionally directed grant. We were offered the opportunity to partner in a congressionally directed grant, and I believe it was Roger Wicker that was the one that sort of offered that to us. And there were things that we could do, but we decided that since we had a lot of people in North Mississippi that would like to take the training, but it was a long way from their home, that we could offer that program up there. We didn't know how it would work, but we were able to partner also with Blue Mountain College at the time. They're now Blue Mountain Christian University. But they agreed for us to come and use their facilities and permitted us to do that. Now, we pay for that privilege to do that, but this grant also helped to provide some of the tuition and other costs, book costs and that sort of thing for the initial group up there. And so it was cohort 9, cohort 9 in 2011, and we I think that grant lasted for 2 full years and maybe an additional year, and after that we got no more funding from it, but it was so successful that we've been able to have a cohort up there ever since 2011. Wow. We no longer can offer stipends for the tuition and books and things, but we have kept it going, and sometimes we have almost as many people training up there as we have down here.
And Holly Johnston was in that cohort, 9 at Blue Mountain, and she's now part of our adjunct faculty staff at Mississippi College.
So by 2011, were there already 2 cohorts here
Oh, there were more than 2.
in Clinton? I mean, meeting.
No, there was just one first year and one second
Okay.
year.
Okay.
Yeah.
But each summer there were 2 groups coming in, one intro and one advanced by that point.
Exactly.
So when Blue Mountain started, that was technically our 3rd
Yes.
cohort.
Yes.
Okay.
And Barbara and I took turns because they were happening simultaneously. So one of us would be at the Clinton campus and the other would be at the Blue Mountain campus.
Wow.
And so we would travel back and forth.
So you taught those that initial cohort at Blue Mountain. I don't know that I ever realized that or thought
Because
that through.
we had no other instructors. I mean, they were it.
And Mitty.
And Mitty.
Mitty
That's
Bilbo.
correct. Yes, Mitty.
She began her instructor training with us the very first summer, 2004. So she was there.
So this is Mitty
essentially-
Bilbo we're talking
Mitty
about.
Bilbo, yes, our very fun friend Mitty Bilbo. And so she was there with us, either with me or with Barbara, those 2 weeks.
And she was also the director at the Dyslexia Center when it
Yeah.
began. She began that.
When did that start? Do we know?
We know, but I don't know.
Somewhere in this.
It was really early because we were, Mr. Fagan and Mr. Kearse were really anxious for that center to open. And we really were encouraging them to wait a little while, but it happened anyway.
So did the program start, then the center opened?
Yes.
Okay.
So it was maybe 2006, maybe.
Okay.
I mean,
I
it
would
was
think that would be about right.
2006,
Yeah.
2007. It
Yeah.
was really early.
And bless their hearts, that center moved from spot to spot to spot. They never really had a home.
Till now.
Till
Yeah, now it's fabulous.
Yes,
huh?
it is.
Okay, so that was 2011.
Yeah, and then in 2018, a location was begun in Hattiesburg. That was cohort 24 South. And then in 2021, that group moved to Sumrall with cohort 33 in 2021.
So I did have a question about the Blue Mountain starting in 2011. At that point here at MC, were we having to put folks on waiting lists here?
Yes.
Okay, that was what I was curious
Yes,
about.
we were.
So there
Yeah.
really was a need to
There
expand.
really truly was.
Because by that time, so the first cohort was 13. Then I think the next summer we had maybe 17. And then after that, for several summers, we had between 20 and 21. And people on a waiting list.
Yeah.
And so that's the reason when this congressionally
directed grant.
thank you, came about. And Dr. Locke said that in the past there had been an association with Blue Mountain College. And so that's why he felt comfortable contacting them about us possibly having space to teach. And then we lived in the dorm that first summer.
Stevens Dormitory. Yeah.
Did you travel up there, Shirley?
No, I didn't. I could go one time a year. I got to
Okay.
go when the cohort ended. It's
Okay.
2-year program, and that was the only time I ever got to go. But Blue Mountain has been so gracious to us. They are so helpful and have just bent over backwards to do whatever we needed. And they have beautiful facilities up there.
It's really like a sister
It really
university,
is.
right,
Yes.
to MC.
Yes.
So yeah, things were. I think in my cohort there were either 20 or 21. I mean, we were packed in.
We had several summers when we had that many. And a waiting list.
And some people had to wait, an entire year before they could start, and they were willing to do that,
Right.
which just astounds me now.
Well, I think sometimes, I know for me when I started, I don't think I quite understood what I was getting myself into, but it's been the joy of my life. There's a devotion I've read in Streams of the Desert where it talks about sometimes you just have to, one door is going to open, you need to walk through it. You don't really know what's going to happen after that, but then something else is going to open up. So I really do feel like that's kind of been the theme of what's happened
Well,
here.
and he clearly prepared the way. I mean, going all the way back to 1887 when the word dyslexia was used. But especially with all the work that was done from the staff at Scottish Rite Hospital and Mr. Fagan and Mr. Kearse.
And it was also very rare to have a college program in dyslexia therapy. Mississippi College was one of the very few.
One of 4.
Yeah,
that
what
were
what
there
are
at
what were the 4 at that time?
Southern Methodist University in Dallas.
Okay, yeah.
Fairleigh Dickinson University in New Jersey, Dallas Baptist University.
And us.
Mm-hmm.
And that's expanded since then, right?
Oh,
To
yeah.
some, yeah.
Well, not for a whole master's degree.
Are those for master's degree level?
Those are all master's degrees.
And here in the state, we've got 2 additional
Yes,
colleges.
so we now have, there's a long list on the accreditation organization website of colleges and universities that have a 3 or a 6 or 9 hours of credit. But they aren't a whole degree. They're just
right.
one course that you take or 2 courses.
Almost
or 3
like an
courses.
endorsement or something.
Right. Mm-hmm.
Something I like about our program, as far as when a person applies, we don't require that they have a bachelor's degree in education. Can you talk a bit about why that decision was made?
I can. So on a personal basis, what we have found in teaching this program, whether it's in Dallas or Clinton, it's a very steep paradigm shift for educators that have either been in the classroom a long time or particularly have been in special education for a long time, because we don't teach to mastery today. It's a long process of teaching a child to read, write, and spell. And sometimes it's easier for someone coming in from another background than it is having to make that big paradigm shift from how they've been teaching. And it's not that they don't want to learn a new way, because they absolutely do. But after you've taught something a certain way for a long time, sometimes it takes a while to retrain your brain and yourself on how you're going to do it differently. And so, in my opinion, I just wanted someone to have a bachelor's degree to be able to enter a graduate level course. And it doesn't matter to me. We have had graduates with law degrees, with psychology degrees, with medical degrees. We've had a nurse. We currently have an attorney in training. And so they're not having to take off the teacher hat and now try to put on the therapy level hat,
I love
therapist
that.
hat.
And their motivation is usually, there's a passion there for why they're wanting to do this a lot of times, right?
Right.
What's probably been the most unusual background that you've had come through, you think?
Well, these aren't necessarily unusual, but we've had a lot of speech language pathologists. We've had a lot of occupational therapists.
Maybe they were seeing gaps in what they were trying to do, and maybe they found that the dyslexia therapy program might have helped to fill some of those gaps.
That's right.
And what the speech therapists have told us is that many of them in the schools where they're working are being asked to teach children to read, and they didn't know how to do it. The occupational therapists, it's really interesting, because what they tell us is that so much of the kinesthetic things that we do are so similar to what they've learned to do in their kinesiology background. And that goes all the way back to Dr. Samuel T. Orton.
We've also had several people lately that are ready to retire from the teaching profession.
Right.
And they want to keep their hand in teaching, but they don't necessarily want to deal with an entire classroom of children. And so this is wonderful for them, because they can continue on as an educator and help children along the way and not have the stress of having to deal with so many at one time.
Well, and we have one of those who is really on fire about telling other retired teachers that they need to sign up for this class, because she has enjoyed it so much, and she just thinks this would be a wonderful place for.
She's a real missionary for our program.
Yes, she is.
But
As is the attorney.
Yes.
Yeah, and don't you love that, though, when someone has spent their entire career teaching in a classroom setting, and you know that they have certain expectations and ideas and beliefs of how things ought to be done, but then they come here and they accept what you teach them, right? And they do take off that hat and put on the new one, and it just opens up a whole new world for them.
Well, and then what they say is, oh my goodness, I wish I'd known this, 20 years ago. There were so many children that I used everything that I knew of to use, but I could not teach this child to read. And if I'd only known this,
Yeah.
I could have helped that child.
You think back, like I even think back in my teaching career, the kids that I had in junior high and high school who were behavior problems and caused issues for me in my classroom. I kind of think I know why they were doing that because I was an English teacher, right? And I was having these expectations of them to read and to comprehend and then to, write things. But really, they probably needed someone to sit down with them and go back to some foundational instruction.
Mm-hmm.
But at the time, I didn't know.
And as Kay was saying, we've had quite a few people that come through the program that have dyslexia themselves, and sometimes very severe dyslexia, and they have just had an eye-opening experience, and they have such passion for it because they've lived it.
Well, and what I love about our program is that you are certainly trained to be a dyslexia therapist, but during the training, there comes a time where, and you all have said this, and we say this to our students in Summerall, they'll ask a question, and the response sometimes is, well, it just depends on the student. And I think that's the beauty of the program is that we're being trained to be therapists, not to just present a curriculum. That we can make decisions about how to individualize for our student while staying inside that structured lesson plan, but we're teaching individuals.
Well, and that is our whole goal here at Mississippi College, is to teach you the structure of the language. And we use several different curricula for that, but we want each of our graduates to be able to individualize the instruction based on the needs of that student.
Okay, is there anything else that you want to cover that's important to you?
I think I just want to say how thankful we are that Mississippi College was willing to take a chance on this new adventure that they really knew nothing about, but were willing to take a chance. And Dr. Locke said he just thought, back to the movie, if you build it, they will come. And they certainly did come. And we have been so supported by every administrator that's been on campus, and particularly those that have been in the School of Education, either the dean of the School of Education or the directors of the chairpersons. So each of the people that have been in that position have been very supportive of us. And I don't know of any other campus where that happens.
I don't either.
Shirley, off the top of your head, do we know how many people we've graduated?
Yes, we do.
Okay.
451 souls.
Wow.
Yeah, and we've had about 600 people to go through the program. Some of them are still working toward their graduation, but 451 solid graduates, and they are all over the country because sometimes we train them and then they go to other states. And we even have some that have been working in foreign countries, one in Uganda and one in Honduras, and maybe others that I don't know about, but those two for sure.
The program here at Mississippi College, we did add in the phonological awareness component.
So the original alphabetic phonics curriculum, if you will. So Aylett Cox was kind of the lead author for that. Sally Childs, who worked with Anna Gillingham, came to Dallas for 5 years and worked with Aylett while they were developing this program. So the first 5 years it was strictly the Orton Gillingham that Sally Childs had learned from Anna Gillingham. And it was during that time that they figured out that the instruction needed to be group rather than one-on-one. Anna Gillingham trained one person at a time, whether it was an instructor or a student. And that's how Sally had been trained. But when she began working with Aylett and working with Dr. Waits, they realized that in order to reach more children, that they needed to do small group instruction. So the original alphabetic phonics curriculum had all of what we have at our current lesson cycle, except they did not have phonological awareness at the time. They didn't have as much structured oral language. They had some oral language, but it wasn't as structured. They didn't have as much written expression, and they didn't have as much reading comprehension as we have added, and they did not have the fluency piece that we have added in Mississippi College. So we are an alphabetic phonics based course, but we have added in based on what has been shown to be important from the National Reading Panel report, Scarborough's Reading Rope, the simple view of reading, all of those things that are kind of being talked about now in research groups. We've added all those components in. And Barbara and I brought those with us when we came from Dallas. We had been using those things in Dallas.
I guess when you were going over the relevance of the Orton-Gillingham history for today's instruction, you referenced how the idea of a linkage for letter introduction was referenced in the manuals that
1946.
That Orton or that Anna Gillingham had written. And then
But I think that goes back to Dr. Hinchelwood, who thought that the method of simultaneous and multisensory instruction was appealing to him because it addressed the cerebral centers as much as possible in the brain. So that goes back to the late 1800s. I don't know of many other courses that still include that type of association of letter sound association. They do a letter sound association of some kind, but it's not necessarily this 8-part where we link the name, the shape, the sound, and the feel of a letter together.
Was that something that was important for you to be in this program?
It was.
Is that something that's sort of a common thread in all of your training through the years? You've seen that as an important factor. Even with working with students, you see how much they respond to just that physical movement and engaging all of those modalities. It's really amazing.
One other thing that I wanted to mention is that in some of the current research now, we're beginning to see the word multimodal instead of multisensory. They're essentially very similar things, but there are some researchers that prefer the word multimodal for learning modalities instead of multisensory. So, for example, one of the textbooks that we require for reading at Mississippi College is the Multisensory Teaching of Basic Language Skills, which was edited by Judith Bursch. And in the latest edition, which I believe is a 4th edition, the handwriting chapter has multimodal attached to the handwriting chapter.
Okay.
So I think we're going to begin to see that word more and more. So at Mississippi College, when Barbara and I first came, our goal was for sustainability. We didn't want it to be just come for a few years and then it go away. It was so important to both of us. And she is a wonderful instructor. So Mitty Bilbo was the first instructor that we trained beginning that first summer in 2004. And the process for that is, it is at the invitation of the course director to choose individuals to go through that process. It's a 3-year internship. It takes a long time to do it, but we think that that's really important. And we also think it's important to have a minimum of 2 instructors for each class at any given time, because life happens to all of us, and we need to make sure we have enough staff to take care of the classes.
And I think that you and Barbara had said that you would be willing to come for 10 years.
We did.
And we are now at year 20.
Yes.
And you are still here. And Barbara has been here for practically all that time. She's retired from us as well.
But
I've never heard that before.
Oh, yes. Yes.
We thought after 10 years,
10
surely,
years.
I mean, it would all be in place. But then that's when other locations began.
That's when it really got busy, isn't it? Yeah.
But it's just a 6.5-hour drive away.
I'd just like to say that Kay and Barbara have the strength and the courage and the fortitude more than any women I have ever been around in my life. I honestly don't know how they do it, because Kay is over here at least twice a month and sometimes more than that.
Help us now, blessed Savior, as we go not let us fail or stumble as we go along God's way. Lead us on, Lord Jesus, Lord that head be on high. I spiders sing.